From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here, coming at you on a Wednesday. Got a good show on tap for you. I mean, it's sometimes when you do live TV, you know, you're working on a tightrope wire without a net. Because when showtime comes about, you rock and roll and go, whether everything's in place or not. And in a show like this where we have live guests, they are, like you and I, whenever we travel, susceptible to traffic problems. This morning, our guest, and he will be here any moment, it will be the new Murfreesboro Police Chief Carl Durr. I say new because he's now been there about 6 months. And, you know, he's been on once before. He'll be here with the Public Information Officer, Sergeant Kyle Evans, as well. And we're going to talk to him about a lot of things happening in Murfreesboro and the like, but they had texted and said they're probably pulling up into the lot right now, so they're running a little bit late because of the horrible traffic. Now, here's the thing I know just from this experience with Chief Durr is that he is a good and ethical man. Why? Because someone else, recognizing there was this type of traffic, would fire up the blue lights and take the shoulder around whatever wreck happened. They didn't do that. So as a result, they're going to be running a little bit late, and I respect them for that. But I'm going to open up the phone lines for you. It's not just if you're a viewer that happens to live in Rutherford County or Murfreesboro. I think as we would if we have Sheriff Darren Hall on here, or if we had Chief Anderson from Metro, or Davidson County Sheriff Darren Hall, I want to open it up to a number of questions that are beyond just the local community there. We'll talk to him about what's going on in Murfreesboro and what initiatives he has in place for that fast-growing city. But part of what I want to talk to him about is what we see happening nationally. Did you see what went down last night in Charlotte, North Carolina? There was another incident where there was a police-involved shooting where an African-American was shot and killed. And there's some questions about whether or not he was actually reading a book in the car and whether or not he made threats and why the officer shot him. That's still kind of being explored right now. But as a result, there was a huge riot last night in Charlotte overnight, just probably finally cleared up with police in riot gear and tear gas just within the last few hours. And of course, that comes on the heels of another controversial shooting, police involved, with an African-American who was shot and killed, and there's video of that one out of Tulsa, Oklahoma from earlier this week. So tensions very much simmering there. Now, there were 2 police-involved shootings here in the state of Tennessee, including one here in Metro yesterday. But those, again, while they're under investigation, did not involve the issue of race in any way. Both of the individuals shot in those cases, one of whom died here in Metro, were white. And to me, you know, police-involved shootings, regardless of the color of the skin, need to be investigated. And clearly, there can be justified shootings. And in some of these, as I think we've seen, that were caught on video, were not justified, all right? And the law enforcement officers facing criminal charges. But that is behind a lot of what's going on right now with the protests and the reactions. And I'm just wondering what Chief Durr tells his officers and how they're to respond with situations like this. You could imagine if you're a police officer right now and see what's going on in the world, and you're out in a situation where you may feel as though you need to deploy your weapon, but are you all of a sudden hesitant because you think, if I do this or if I have to use the gun, there's going to be this incredible scrutiny? And does that give you pause, which could result in a bad thing happening if you had to defend yourself? Or are you someone that's just going to be more gun-shy of doing that? I wonder how it affects law enforcement officers while they're on patrol right now. It's a scary situation, and pulling a gun and deciding to use it, and then the questions, that's the last resort. But when you do pull a weapon, there was a case here where a law enforcement officer here in the state pulled a gun, and the individual involved was shot in the leg, not shot and killed, and was able to be taken into custody. I can tell you this, if that's the way that went down, police officers, if they choose to deploy their weapon, are looking to stop the threat, and they are shooting and trying to hit central body mass, meaning their goal and intention is not necessarily to kill. Their goal and intention is to stop you. And the best chance of doing that is to hit you central body mass as opposed to winging you in the calf or something like that. I mean, if they could, it would be nice if they could just aim under a high-stress situation and take you out in the leg. But if an officer is pulling a weapon to fire it, the odds are they're shooting body mass here, with a 9mm weapon, it's going to likely kill you if you get hit by that. Doesn't always happen that way, but that's the way it is. But I had someone say, well, that's the way they should be trained, to shoot, not to kill. They're not shooting to kill. They're shooting to stop the threat. And the point being, if you're aiming at any individual, the best chance you have of hitting them is aiming central body mass, so that if you're not exactly on target, well, you still have the rest of the perimeter of the body that might catch the round when you fire it. It's for the best chance of that. And I think there's a misconception there that police officers, when they fire, are shooting to kill. They're not. They're shooting under whatever circumstance to try to stop the threat. But I'm wondering what law enforcement is telling. You do know here, when it comes to protests and marches, Chief Anderson here in Metro several months back, after the whole situation in Missouri and some of these shootings, there was a protest here that actually ended up on the interstate here in Nashville, and he actually, you know, tried to accommodate without allowing it to escalate, and it was early and blocked off the traffic to allow them to make their way through it. And some were saying, well, no, you can't stop and cause a traffic jam, but I think the way that was handled, and the way Metro Police and I think other law enforcement officers in this area are handling these situations, I think are good, because you know, you have to bend a little bit so that it doesn't escalate beyond what we had here. And you see what happened overnight in Charlotte, North Carolina, which, by the way, was a situation that you had law enforcement officers injured and several of the protesters injured, between rocks being thrown, tear gas. No one was killed, and no one was seriously injured, but there was a lot, gosh, I wish we could pull some of the video up, of video from the scene, from helicopters over, showing that there was looting being done of tractor trailers, where they were grabbing the tractor trailers, taking control of it, pulling all the cargo out and setting it on fire. Now look, you may have a dispute and a concern about what's happening with regard to these shootings, and I totally understand that. And you see some of the protests from athletes like Colin Kaepernick and others, peaceful protests, but showing that they have concerns. Hey, you know what? That's the way to go if that's the way you feel. But this violence and the marching, which turns violent, it doesn't solve anything. But I think I can see the frustration that people have these days when it comes to seeing one shooting after another with the questions raised. Anytime we hear now in the newsroom a police-involved shooting, I mean, as we always do, we respond immediately to that situation. And it's regardless of whether or not it's an African-American or a Caucasian that gets shot at the scene. We check that out. But I can tell you this now, the viewing public immediately, one of the first questions they seem to be asking these days when there's a police-involved shooting is, was the individual shot black? And was the individual who shot him white, or a police officer? And so it's kind of moved the narrative that way. You can say fair or not. That's one of the questions I want to ask Chief Durr as he tries to handle that. So listen, the number 737-7587. It's interesting. We have some calls already coming in, and I may take a few of those, you know, as we wait for him to get here. Again, my apologies. He's in traffic. In fact, I'm looking right now at the news alert sent out by Dave, and it's like a parking lot out there right now on I-24. So hopefully they'll make it in the next few moments, and we'll see. Yes, here they come. Should we take a break, Andrew? You want to take a break? Can we do that real quick? Since we've filled the first 8 minutes, let's take a break. When we come back, Murfreesboro Police Chief Carl Durr will join us, along with Kyle Evans, Sergeant with the department. We're taking your calls. Talk about what I was just discussing right after this. Stay with us.